Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Hadith number 37. From Hakim ibn Hizam, he says that he asked the Prophet for some wealth, and the Prophet gave him. Then he asked again, and the Prophet gave him, and then he asked again, and the Prophet gave him. And then the Prophet ﷺ said to him, إن هذا المال خضرة حلوة فمن أخذه بطيب نفس بورك له فيه ومن أخذه بإشراف نفس لم يبارك له فيه وكان كالذي يأكل ولا يشبع واليد العليا خير من اليد السفلى. This wealth is green and sweet, so whoever takes it without asking for it, then the wealth will be blessed for him. But whoever takes it while hankering after it, or being desirous of it, then the wealth will not be blessed for him, and he will be like the one who eats, but is never satisfied. And the upper hand is better than the lower hand, meaning the giving hand is better than the taking hand. So from this hadith then, we learn the generosity of the Prophet in that he would always give, even if someone was to repeatedly ask him. However, the Prophet feared that Hakim ibn Hizam is going to get spoilt, as he keeps on asking and receiving. So the Prophet felt it necessary to give him some advice by telling him that this wealth is certainly green and sweet, and so you will feel naturally desirous of it. But he says, whoever takes this wealth through the goodwill, so he's not hankering after it, he's not feeling anxious, and so therefore he's not asking for this wealth. If you are given in this way, through a gift, then the wealth will be blessed for you, which means that it will stay and it will benefit you much. But if you take this wealth whilst asking for it, and we know that you should not be asking for wealth, then you will never be satisfied, because the more you ask, the more you receive, and then the more you want. So you'll be like the one who eats but is never satiated. So what's the point in eating when it's not going to satiate you? Likewise, what is the point in having wealth if you're not going to feel content? The ultimate aim is not to gain wealth, it is to gain contentment. But if your millions and billions of pounds are not gaining you contentment, then what is the actual benefit of this money? We take from this hadith that the name Hakim is permissible to have, because this is the name of this companion. The Prophet did not change it. Hakim is also the name of Allah, so you're allowed to have this name as long as the meaning is not intended, as long as it's just a title. But if the meaning is intended, as in the person is Hakim, then this is impermissible. As in the hadith of Abu al-Hakam, they named him this kunya because he would always give good sound judgments which would please both parties. So he had the name Abu al-Hakam, and the Prophet changed it to Abu Shuraih. And the reason for this is not because the kunya Abu al-Hakam is haram, no, rather it is permissible. But the reason why the Prophet changed it is because the meaning of Hakam was actually intended here, not just a mere title. And seeing as though the meaning of the word Hakam solely belongs to Allah Jalla wa Ala, then this is why the Prophet felt the need to change this kunya, so that the people do not give this man, Abu al-Hakam, a status higher than that which he is deserving of. We also learn something which we learned from the last hadith, that the giving hand is better than the taking hand. So it is better to give in charity rather than go and ask people for wealth, when you are able to earn for your own self. Hadith number 38. The Prophet ﷺ said, مَنْ يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ وَإِنَّمَا أَنَا قَاسِمٌ وَيُعْطِ اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. Whomsoever Allah wants good for, He gives him understanding in this deen, and I am only the divider of the wealth, I won't distribute, rather it is Allah who gives. So in this hadith we learn that gaining an understanding of this deen is a clear evidence that Allah wills good for you. Gaining an understanding of this deen would mean Islamic jurisprudence, it would mean tafsir, it would mean understanding of the Arabic language, of the hadith, of usul al-fiqh, and all these different branches of knowledge, which would afford you a good holistic picture of this deen. The Prophet is saying in this hadith that ultimately it is not the Prophet who gives, Allah Jalla wa Ala is the one who gives. And the Prophet merely distributes what Allah Jalla wa Ala has given. Hadith 39, about who the maskeen really is. From Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, لَيْسَ الْمِسْكِينُ الَّذِي تَرُدُّهُ التَّمْرَةُ وَالتَّمْرَتَانِ وَلَا اللُّقْمَةُ وَاللُّقْمَتَانِ إِنَّمَا الْمِسْكِينُ الْمُتَعَفِّفُ اقْرَأُوا إِنْ شِئْتُمْ لَا يَسْأَلُونَ النَّاسَ إِلْحَافًا. He says the miskeen is not the one that you give 1 or 2 dates to or 1 or 2 morsels to. Rather, the miskeen is the one who refrains from asking. And if you want, you can recite لا يسألون الناس إلحافا, and they do not beg the people at all. So this type of person, the miskeen, is the one who does not beg the people, because begging the people is a humiliation upon him, and he will be embarrassed. So it would be the type of person many will not know that he's poor, because he does not ask. But if you know that he is needy, then he is still worthy of your money, even if he does not ask, because the point is not about asking, the point is whether he is needy or not. Now the important rule to understand here is that if he does not ask, it is because he does not want to embarrass himself. So therefore you should not give him openly and in public, because you would be embarrassing him. So you would be doing exactly what he is trying to avoid. So if you were to give a person like this, it ought to be in private. Actually, the ayah which is quoted in Surah Al-Baqarah refers to the fuqara, that they do not beg the people at all. So we can see from this that the miskeen and the faqir are the same thing. They are the same type of person. So the miskeen is the faqir and the faqir is the miskeen. If they are mentioned both in the same sentence, then there will be a technical difference between them. Otherwise, the asl or the default is that they are the same people. Hadith number 40, about the prohibition of asking other people for wealth. From Hamza ibn Abdullah ibn Umar, that the Prophet said, مَا يَزَالُ الرَّجُلُ يَسْأَلُ النَّاسَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ وَلَيْسَ فِي وَجْهِهِ مُزْعَةُ لَحْمٍ. A man does not cease to ask people, so he continuously asks people for wealth until he will come on Yawm al-Qiyamah and not a morsel of flesh will be on his face. Likewise in the chapter, from Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, مَنْ سَأَلَ النَّاسَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ تَكَثُّرًا فَإِنَّمَا يَسْأَلُ جَمْرًا فَلْيَسْتَقِلَّ أَوْ لِيَسْتَكْثِرْ. Whoever asks people for their wealth in order to hoard up his own wealth, then he is actually asking for hot coals, so let him ask little or much. Also in the chapter, from Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, لَأَنْ يَحْتَزِمَ أَحْدُكُمْ حُزْمَةً مِنْ حَطَبٍ فَيَحْمِلَهَا عَلَى ظَهْرِهِ فَيَبِيعَهَا خَيْرٌ لَهُ مِنْ أَنْ يَسْأَلَ رَجُلًا يُعْطِيهِ أَوْ يَمْنَعُهُ. That a man should carry some firewood on his back and then come and sell it, it is better for him than to ask people for money, whether they give him or not. These 3 hadith make it evidently clear that it is not permissible to ask people for money. This is in the case where you are able to earn, or you have no pressing need to do so. If you are in desperate situations, then we can make an exception there, and the hadith for the exception is coming up. But these hadith are talking about asking without due right, when you are able to earn. So this applies to when you ask another person for money, or even when you claim of the welfare state. All of this is impermissible if you're able to earn for your own self. We find then that asking people without due right is a major sin. In one hadith it's been likened to actually asking for hot coal, so that you can ask little or much. Now a choice is given, but that does not mean that both options are good. Sometimes a choice could be given, but one of the options is no good. As in Allah Jalla wa Ala saying, وَقُلِ الْحَقُّ مِنْ رَبِّكُمْ فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. And say that the truth is from your Rabb. So, whosoever wills, let him believe, and whosoever wills, let him disbelieve. Now clearly you do have a choice, and all people have this choice. The Quran makes it very clear. But just because you have a choice does not mean that one of the options is good, or has any good in it. And from the other hadith we learn that you will have no flesh on your face on Yawm al-Qiyamah. This is because as you ask, you are humiliating yourself, so you're losing face. And so in the hereafter as well, you will lose face. So you humiliated yourself in this world, and in the hereafter you will also be humiliated. But it will just show in a different manner. The Prophet ﷺ also said in an authentic hadith, الْمَسْأَلَةُ كَدٌّ يَكُدُّ بِهَا الرَّجُلُ وَجْهَهُ إِلَّا رَجُلًا يَسْأَلُ السُّلْطَانَ أَوْ فِي أَمْرٍ لَا بُدَّ مِنْ. That asking people for wealth is like scratches which a man scratches his face with, except if a man asks the ruler for something which he is entitled to, or he asks other people in a desperate affair. So there's no way out for him, he must ask. So if that's the case, then it's okay, but otherwise you are scratching your own face away. and the results of which will be shown in the hereafter. No doubt all of these ahadith prove that it is haram to ask people without due right. Hadith 41.
From Qabisa ibn Mukhariq al-Hilali radiyallahu anhu,
he said that I wanted to reconcile between two disputing parties, so I decided to reconcile between them by giving each of them money. And for this I came to ask the Prophet for help, and the Prophet said, أقم حتى تأتينا الصدقة فنأمر لك بها. Stay with us until the wealth of the sadaqah, meaning the zakah, comes, and we will order for it to be given to you. And then the Prophet told him, يا قبيصة إن المسألة لا تحل إلا لأحد ثلاثة. O Qubaysa, asking people for money is not allowed except in three cases. رجل تحمل حمالة فحلت له المسألة حتى يصيبها ثم يمسك. Firstly, a man who wants to resolve a dispute between two disputing factions or parties by paying them money, so for him, he is allowed to ask for money until he receives enough to resolve the dispute, and then he must stop asking. ورجل أصابته جائحة اجتاحت ماله فحلت له المسألة حتى يصيب قواما من عيش أو قال سدادا من عيش. And then secondly, a man whose wealth has been destroyed by a natural calamity, so he is allowed to ask until he receives enough to live by. ورجل أصابته فاقة حتى يقوم ثلاثة من ذوي الحجى من قومه لقد أصابت فلانا فاقة فحلت له المسألة حتى يصيب قواما من عيش أو قال سدادا من عيش فما سواهن من المسألة يا قبيصة سحتا يأكلها صاحبها سحتا. And then thirdly, a man who has been afflicted by poverty. So he's not allowed to ask until three intelligent men from his community testify that yes, this man has been afflicted with poverty. Then for him to ask is allowed until he receives enough to live by. But apart from these three, O Qubaysa, if a person asks and he takes the money, it will be suht, meaning it will be haram earning, and this person will be consuming this wealth as haram earning. So in this hadith, exceptions are made to the general rule that you're not allowed to ask people money. The first one, as you've heard, a person wants to reconcile, and this involves giving each disputing faction money, so he's allowed to ask until he receives enough. Secondly, a man whose wealth has been destroyed by some natural calamity. Maybe you are a farmer and you have a locust invasion, they destroy your crops, or some other natural calamity. So then you are definitely allowed to ask because you will be from the masakin. And then thirdly is a man who used to be rich, but now he's claiming that he is in poverty. Now here we need three male intelligent witnesses who are of course just from his community, because people from his community would know him better. They need to testify, yes, his situation has changed. Though he used to have wealth, he now no longer has wealth, and he is definitely entitled to the zakah. And the reason for these three witnesses is because the asl is that he is still rich. Now he's claiming something against the asl, against the default. And the one who does that needs to provide evidence. And the evidence here is three witnesses who are male and who are just and intelligent. You'll notice in the hadith that he says حَتَّى يُصِيبَ قِوَامًا مِنْ عَيْشٍ, until he receives enough to go by on. So the recipients of the zakah, they receive enough to go by on till the next year when they receive the zakah payment. We also learn from this hadith that the zakah payment can be given to one category only. Otherwise we know there are potentially 8 categories, but if he give you a zakah to just one category, this suffices, because the Prophet told him, أَقِمْ حَتَّى تَأْتِيَنَا الصَّدَقَةِ فَنَأْمُرُ لَكَ بِهَا. Stay with us until the sadaqah comes and we will order for it to be given to you. What is apparent here is that the whole of the sadaqah will be given to him. And so it is not necessary, as some ulama have said, that the zakah wealth must be given to each of the 8 categories. And we also find out from this hadith that unless you're from these categories of people and you ask money, it will be suht, haram wealth. So again we learn from the hadith that asking people without due right is haram earning. Hadith number 42, that it is permissible to take wealth if you're given it as a gift. From Umar ibn al-Khattab, he says the Prophet gave him some money. And Umar told the Prophet, give it to someone else because he is poorer than I am. And the Prophet told him, خُذْهُ فَتَمَوَّلْهُ أَوْ تَصَدَّقْ بِهِ وَمَا جَاءَكَ مِنْ هَذَا الْمَالِ وَأَنْتَ غَيْرُ مُشْرِفٍ وَلَا سَائِلٍ فَخُذْهُ وَمَا لَا فَلَا تُتْبِعْهُ نَفْسَكَ. Take it and you can store it or give it in charity. And whatever comes to you from this wealth, and you are not seeking or hankering after it, nor you are asking for it, then you take this wealth. Otherwise, do not let yourself become desirous of it. So we find from this then that you must accept the gift. If you do not accept the gift, then you will hurt the feeling of the one who is giving you the gift. So the sunnah is to accept the gift and to give gifts back in return, as this sows love between people. You would not accept the gift if it is some sort of haram wealth, unless you wanted to destroy it afterwards, and you would not accept the gift if you fear that this person would remind you of this favor he has given you. Meaning to say, if he would have minnah over you, then you would not accept it. So we find then that accepting a gift is not the same as asking for wealth, as there is no humiliation upon you in accepting a gift because you did not ask for it. The humiliation is in the asking part. Hadith number 43, about being desirous of this world. From Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, قَلْبُ الشَّيْخِ شَابٌ عَلَى حُبِّ اثْنَتَيْنِ طُولُ الْحَيَاةِ وَحُبُّ الْمَالِ. The heart of an old man will still be young about the love of two things, a long life and the love of wealth. The Prophet ﷺ in this hadith is simply giving us a warning that naturally the heart of mankind will hanker after this world and its glamour and glitter. Even if you grow old, physically and biologically, the love for a long life and for wealth will never grow old and weary. So do not let this part of your nature get the better of you. The more you desire after this world, the more you would want it and you'll never be satisfied. So you need to try to disconnect yourself from this world somewhat. Hadith number 44. Again on this theme that you will never be content. From Anas bin Malik, the Prophet said, لو كان لابن آدم واد من ذهب أحب أن له واديا آخر ولن يملأ فاه إلا التراب والله يتوب على من تاب. If the son of Adam had a valley of gold, he would love to have another, and nothing would fill his mouth except dust, and Allah accepts the repentance of those who turn to Him. So again, we see from this hadith, you will never be satisfied with this world. If you had a valley of gold, you would simply want another. So again, we ask the question, what is the actual benefit of wealth if you are not satisfied? You always want more and more. Is being satisfied and content your ultimate aim, or is earning as much money as you can your ultimate aim? Well, surely the ultimate aim needs to be contentment, but money is not necessarily the same as contentment. In fact, it could be the absolute opposite. The Prophet said that nothing would fill his mouth except dust. This is when he is buried in the grave. Only that will fully fill his mouth, otherwise money will not fully fill you up. You always want more and more. This hadith, Ibn Abbas says about it, I do not know if it is from the Quran or not. This hadith used to be recited as part of the Quran. It is now abrogated and it is left as a hadith and not a Quranic ayah. Notice also that he says the son of Adam, which tells us that mankind is the son of Adam alayhi salam, the first man, which is in direct refutation of the popular Darwinian evolution theory, which is making its rounds nowadays, and people are fooled by this. The aim of this theory being, of course, to do away with this idea that we need a creator. This is the ultimate agenda behind this theory, which is being pushed down people's throats. So you, O listener, akramakallah, must not be fooled. Hadith 45, explaining to us what richness actually is. From Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, ليس الغنى عن كثرة العرض ولكن الغنى غنى النفس. Richness is not when you have much wealth or material possession, but rather richness is when you are content with whatever you have. And like we said before, this is the ultimate aim, just to be content. The ultimate aim is not to amass wealth, because this could lead to exactly what you don't want, which is the lack of contentment, as is made plain by the previous ahadith about the value of gold and about the wealth being green and sweet and you being like the one who eats but is never satisfied, and the hadith about the heart of the old man. So the Islamic guideline then gives us the true definition of what richness actually is. You can have a little amount of wealth yet actually be rich. Hadith number 46, about the virtue of not asking and being patient. From Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, he says some people from the Ansar asked the Prophet for wealth and he gave them until the wealth ran out, and he said to them, مَا يَكُنْ عِنْدِي مِنْ خَيْرٍ فَلَنْ أَدَّخِرَهُ عَنْكُمْ وَمَنْ يَسْتَعْفِفْ يُعِفَّهُ اللَّهُ وَمَنْ يَسْتَغْنِ يُغْنِهِ اللَّهُ وَمَنْ يَصْبِرْ يُصَبِّرْهُ اللَّهُ وَمَا أُعْطِيَ أَحَدٌ مِنْ عَطَاءٍ خَيْرٌ وَأَوْسَعُ مِنَ الصَّبْرِ. He said to them, I do not have anything which I would store or hoard away from you, and whoever refrains from asking, then Allah will make him refrain from asking. And the one who seeks sufficiency, Allah will keep him self-sufficient. And he who shows endurance, Allah will grant him the power to endure. And no one is blessed with an endowment superior to endurance or patience. So we learn from this hadith then that Allah Jalla wa Ala will aid you in the righteous actions you want to perform, or the righteous actions which you seek. So if you seek to refrain from asking people, then Allah Jalla wa Ala will make your state of affairs such that you do not ask people. And if you seek self-sufficiency, then Allah will make you sufficient for your own needs without others donating money to you. And if you seek patience and endurance, you make that effort, then Allah Jalla wa Ala will make this endeavor easy for you. And the best gift anyone is given is patience or endurance. Also, the Prophet ﷺ, encouraging us to be content, tells us from Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ أَسْلَمَ وَرُزِقَ كَفَافًا وَقَنَّعَهُ اللَّهُ بِمَا آتَاهُ. Indeed, he has succeeded, the one who firstly has submitted and become a Muslim and has been given just enough to go by, and Allah has made him content with what He has given him. So here, a very valuable hadith. It gives us 3 ingredients for success. Firstly, Islam. Secondly, being given kafaf, which is just enough to go by, not too much and not too little, because either extremes are no good. And then thirdly, that whatever you have, Allah has made you content with what you have. And this will happen if you seek contentment with what you have, of course. You seek contentment, Allah will make you content. So with these 3 ingredients, we find the recipe for success. And it is not how the materialistic kuffar would think that it is to have a super high-powered job with a great bank balance and a luxurious car, mansion, jacuzzi, and so on. And this hadith is in accordance with what we mentioned earlier, that richness is the richness of the self, meaning when you are content with whatever you have. So both of these hadith have the same meaning. And we have already mentioned that the more you desire, then the more you will not be content. You will be like the one who eats but is not content. And if you find yourself, O listener, akramakallah, with these 3 ingredients as mentioned in the hadith, then rejoice. As far as Allah Jalla wa Ala is concerned, you are a success. Also the Prophet in the same chapter would make the dua, Allahumma ij'al rizqa ali Muhammadin qutan. O Allah, make the provision of the family of Muhammad qut, which is just enough to go by. Not too little, because that's no good, but not in extravagance either, because that's no good. And so from this we find the virtue of just having enough that you can live by, and not having far too much, because for some people this could be a means to distract them from the path of Allah Jalla wa Ala. Every time a man becomes richer, normally you will find the case, though there are exceptions, but generally the case is that he sees himself to be self-sufficient, not in need of Allah, and he rejects Allah thereby. كَلَّا إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَيَطْغَى أَنْ رَآهُ اسْتَغْنَى. Nay, man transgresses the bounds as he sees himself to be self-sufficient, so not in need of Allah. Hadith number 47, about giving to someone even if he asks violently. From Anas ibn Malik, he says that a Bedouin met the Prophet and he pulled the cloak of the Prophet so violently that the marks were left on the Prophet's neck. And he said, O Muhammad, order that I should be given of the wealth which Allah has put at your disposal. The Prophet ﷺ turned his attention to him, and he smiled, and then he ordered that a gift be given for him. Now, if an average person is treated like this, he'd probably fight back physically and have no respect for the one who treats him roughly. But we see here the Prophet ﷺ, his standard of character was quite something else. He simply turns around at this Bedouin and smiles at him and orders that some wealth be given. These Bedouins are ignorant in nature and rough, and the Prophet knew this. He knew that this is just his nature, so there's no point trying to fight it. Rather, it would be better to treat his roughness with gentleness to show him the example. Notice how he says, O Muhammad. This is not the normal behavior of the companions. The companions address the Prophet with Ya Rasulullah. But the Bedouins are ignorant, and we know this. So this type of behavior is only to be expected. Also, we know that the Prophet would give those people he feared who had a weak iman, as we find in the next chapter, that he gave some wealth to a person. And one of the companions, Sa'ad, he noticed that the Prophet did not give to another man. And so he stood up and privately told the Prophet, O Messenger of Allah, why are you not giving this other man? Verily, I see him as a mu'min. And the Prophet said, O Muslim. And so Sa'ad sat down and kept quiet. Then he approached the Prophet and said the same thing again, and the Prophet replied again. And this happened one more time, so 3 times in total. Sa'ad would say that, verily I see him as a mu'min, and the Prophet would say, O Muslim. And then the Prophet replied, Inni la u'ti rajula, wa ghayruhu ahabbu ilayya minhu khashyata an yakubba fin nari ala wajhi. I would give to a man, but another man is more beloved to me than him, but the reason why I give to the less beloved man is that I fear that he will fall on his face in the fire. Meaning to say, due to his weak iman. And also we learn, the Prophet said, oh, he's a Muslim. Now this does not mean that the other guy was not a mu'min. However, it draws a distinction between a Muslim and a mu'min. The mu'min is having iman. This is a private matter in the heart. As for the Muslim who displays his Islam, this is an outward matter. So Islam is your outward action, and iman are your inward actions of the heart, of your beliefs, of your convictions. And this is not quite so apparent. So you testify that a particular person is a Muslim, you do not testify that he is a mu'min, because these are matters of the heart and you don't know about. Allah Jalla wa Ala knows about it. There is a hadith which says that if you see a person always frequenting the masjid, then testify that he has iman. But this hadith is weak, although there is no doubt that only the iman of a person would make his heart attached to the masjid. But as for us testifying of his iman, then no. But we can certainly testify that he's a Muslim. Hadith 48. When the Muslims had beaten the tribe of Hawazin and had gained the spoils of war, the Prophet gave this wealth to the people of Quraysh. And some of the companions said, May Allah forgive the Messenger of Allah. He gives to the Quraysh and he leaves us, whilst it is our swords which are dripping with the blood of the Hawazin, meaning we are the ones who fought and earned this, yet he is giving to the Quraysh. And so this news of the indignant feeling of the Sahaba reached the Prophet. And so he gathered them all together. He asked them, is there anyone amongst you not from your tribe? They said, no, just the son of our sister. And the Prophet said, the son of the sister is from the tribe of the people. And he justified his decision to them. He said, the Quraysh have recently abandoned their Jahiliyyah period and have been delivered from distress. I therefore wanted to conciliate them. Don't you feel happy that the people should return with the worldly riches and you return with the Messenger of Allah to your homes? If the people were to tread a valley and the Ansar were to tread a narrow path in the mountain, I would tread the narrow path of the Ansar. So in this hadith then we find the Prophet is consoling the Sahaba and justifying his decision, because clearly some of the Sahaba were feeling indignant. They even said, may Allah forgive the Messenger of Allah. Now it does not appear to us that the major companions or the closer companions could say such a thing, but maybe some of the younger or inexperienced companions would have uttered these words. We learn from this narration the virtue of the Ansar, how the Prophet loved them, and he would stick to them rather than anyone else. He also said that the Ansar are the shi'ar, which is the clothing next to the body, and that the rest of the people are dithar, which is the upper garment not connected to the main body. So the Ansar are closer to the Prophet than the rest of the mankind. Also on this day of Yawm Hunayn, when they beat the tribe of Hawazin, one man came and he said to the Prophet, "Fear Allah and be just." To which the Prophet was extremely angry and he said, "Who would be just if I am not just?" And he said, "May Allah have mercy on Musa. He had to put up with more harm and annoyance than this, yet he kept patient." This man who uttered these words, telling the Prophet to fear Allah and be patient, was Dhul Qawaisara. And from his progeny came the Khawarij, the rebellious group who would kill Muslims, attack them, make takfir against them. Hadith number 50 about the Khawarij and their description. From Jabir ibn Abdullah, he says, a person came to the Prophet at Ji'arana, that's the name of a place. He came from Hunayn, and in the clothes of Bilal there was some silver. The Prophet took a handful from that and gave it to the people. This man then said to the Prophet, "Ya Muhammad i'dil, O Muhammad, be just." And the Prophet said to him, "Destruction be upon you. Who could be just if I am not just?"
I would be disappointed and lost if I did not do any justice.
And to this Umar ibn al-Khattab said, "Permit me to kill this hypocrite." And the Prophet replied, "May there be the protection of Allah. People would start to say that I kill my companions." Then the Prophet went on to say that this man and his companions would be reciting the Quran, but it will not go past their throats, meaning the actual Quran will not reach their hearts. يَمْرُقُونَ مِنْهُ كَمَا يَمْرُقُ السَّهْمُ مِنَ الرَّمِيَّةِ. They will exit through this deen just like the arrow exits right through the animal it has pierced. So this man is said to be the father of the Khawarij. From his progeny will come a people who are rebellious and will fight the Muslims, and he will even kill them and leave the kuffar alone. And they will make takfir upon the Muslims. These are all descriptions given in the narrations. There's no doubt that this man himself is a munafiq. His words which he spoke to the Prophet betray his secret. Clearly these are the words of nifaq. He tells the Prophet to be just. Only a kafir can truly believe that the Prophet is not just. In another narration, the Prophet did not kill him because he said maybe he prays. So maybe he is in fact a Muslim. A sinful one, but a Muslim nevertheless. There's an important lesson which comes out of this. The Prophet said that he was not going to kill him, as the people will start to talk that the Prophet kills his companions, and this would repel them from entering into Islam. So you need to look at these things. You could be doing something to repel people away from the deen of Islam. So you do need to be careful. Many Muslims nowadays, they do not take this into consideration, and they start doing stupid things which would make people averse to the deen of Islam. It's the opposite of giving da'wah to Islam. You're giving da'wah away from Islam. You are repelling people. So in this then there is a great lesson for us, that you mustn't do things which would repel people away from Islam. Now of course that does not mean not practicing your deen. If in practicing your deen certain people will be repelled away from Islam, then so be it. That's their problem, not yours. And also, if he was to kill this man, then the people coming after the Prophet will also start to kill those people they suspect are munafiqs. And this will lead to a lot of bloodshed in the land and disorder and chaos. Anyone you think might be a munafiq, you go out and kill him. Why? Because the Prophet did so. This would cause endless anarchy. Rather you just treat people in accordance with what appears outwardly from their actions. If a person is outwardly a Muslim, then so be it. You treat him as a Muslim. You don't need to delve inside his heart. The Prophet says about these people, they will leave the deen just like the arrow leaves the animal it pierces through. So from this there is a difference of opinion. Are these Khawarij kuffar or not? Some said yes, they are kuffar. According to this hadith, clearly they will leave the deen just like the arrow leaves the animal it pierces through. Others have said no, they are not kuffar, but they are evildoers. As this man who told the Prophet to be just said something which leads to kufr, but not kufr in and of itself. He did not clearly state a word of kufr. Just as a Mu'tazili might say that Allah is alim, knowledgeable, but He does not have ilm, He does not have knowledge. Or for example that He is hayy, living, but He does not have haya, life. Knowledgeable without knowledge, living without life. Now, if you don't have knowledge, clearly you are not knowledgeable. If a person says that Allah is not knowledgeable, he is not alim, then this is clear-cut kufr, no doubt. And if anyone says that Allah is not living, he is not hayy, then again this is clear-cut kufr. But look how they say it. They say he is living without life. Now, if you say he has no life, then what that leads to is that he is not living. But they clearly state that he is living. So they would affirm the name, but deny the attribute, the Mu'tazilah. And so based upon this, we have a slight confusion. Are they kuffar or not? Because the point is, they have not clearly stated a word of kufr. If they had said that Allah is not living, then clearly this would be kufr by consensus of the scholars. But they have said that he is living without life. So without life means that he ought not to be living, because how can you be living and you don't have life? So what they've said leads to kufr, but is not kufr in and of itself. Rather, it leads to kufr. It leads to the conclusion that Allah is not living. But as you just heard, they do say that he is living. And so this creates some confusion as to whether they are kuffar or not. And so many scholars have likened the Khawarij to the Mu'tazilah then. They've said that this man, what he said leads to kufr, but he did not clearly state any word of kufr. Al-Imam al-Shafi'i says that the Khawarij are not kuffar, and that he would even accept the testimony of all people of bid'ah, like the Khawarij and the Mu'tazilah and others, as they are still Muslims. In another narration, the Prophet says about them, يَقْتُلُ أَهْلَ الْإِسْلَامِ وَيَدَعُونَ أَهْلَ الْأَوْثَانِ. They will kill the people of Islam and leave the people of idols. And also from another narration, when Khalid ibn Walid asked the Prophet permission to kill this man, the Prophet said, لَا لَعَلَّهُ أَن يَكُونَ يُصَلِّي. No, perhaps he prays. So it shows us that the one who prays is still within Islam, and the one who does not pray, therefore, is outside the fold of Islam. So anyway, the point is the Prophet did not kill them, because you have to weigh the pros and cons. If in doing a particular action it will create more of a harm, then you leave it off. Firstly, it will put the people off embracing Islam if they find out that the Prophet kills his own people. And then secondly, you might just be killing a Muslim. As the Prophet said, no, perhaps he does pray. In another narration he also says about them, لَإِنْ أَدْرَكْتُهُمْ لَقَتَلْتُهُمْ قَتْلَ ثَمُودٍ. If I was to meet these people, I would kill them just like the killing of Thamud. Meaning all together, just like Thamud were destroyed altogether. The thing about the Khawarij is that outwardly they appear to be righteous people. In another narration, the Prophet said about these people that you will meet these people, you will deem your salah to be insignificant compared to their salah. So what would appear thereof is that they are righteous people. However, they will have ideas of rebellion. They would make takfir upon Muslims and even kill them. The Prophet ﷺ encouraged killing the Khawarij under the permission of the ruler. From Ali ibn Abi Talib, that the Prophet said, سيخرج في آخر الزمان قوم أحداث الأسنان سفهاء الأحلام يقولون من خير قول البرية يقرؤون القرآن لا يجاوز حناجرهم يمرقون من الدين كما يمرق السهم من الرمية فإذا لقيتموهم فاقتلوهم فإن في قتلهم أجرا لمن قتلهم عند الله يوم القيامة. At the end of time there will arise a nation who will be young and of foolish mind. They will speak with the best speech anyone can say. They will recite the Quran and it will not go past their throats. They will come out of the deen just like the arrow comes out of the animal. So if you meet these people, then kill them, because for the one who kills them will be a great reward with Allah on Yawm al-Qiyamah. So they are described as being young and of foolish mind. And definitely young people have a lot of passion, they have a lot of desire, but not much wisdom to guide this passion. They will say the best speech of mankind. So what appears thereof from their speech is that this is goodly speech. For example, they're saying that the rule only belongs to Allah, and things of this nature. And this was the statement of the Khawarij when they fought Ali ibn Abi Talib. They said that the rule only belongs to Allah. And they accused Ali ibn Abi Talib of not ruling by what Allah Jalla wa Ala has revealed. And so they rebelled against him and they fought the army of Ali ibn Abi Talib. And from this hadith we learn the obligation of fighting the rebellious people, the Khawarij and the Bugha. The Bugha are the rebellious people, like guerrilla fighters who fight against the ruler. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, فَقَاتِلُوا الَّتِي تَبْغِي حَتَّى تَفِيءَ إِلَىٰ أَمْرِ اللَّهِ. So fight the one who transgresses, meaning the fi'ah or the party who transgresses, until they return to the order of Allah. The Prophet also describes the Khawarij as the most evil of creation, as he says, هُمْ شَرُّ الْخَلْقِ وَالْخَلِيقَةِ. And just note here that just because these Khawarij will speak good words, the best speech of mankind, for example, the ruling only belongs to Allah, as Ali ibn Abi Talib said, these are words of truth, but batil is intended by these words. Because by these words of truth in and of themselves, what they intend to do is to fight Ali ibn Abi Talib. So they're using words of truth to justify their evil action. Hadith 51. That the Zakaah is not permissible for the family of the Prophet, and they are Banu Hashim. From Abu Hurairah, that the Prophet's grandchild Al-Hasan ibn Ali picked up a date from the date of Sadaqah and started putting it in his mouth. The Prophet said to him, Kach, Kach, irmi biha, ama alimta anna la na'kulu sadaqah. He said to him, Kach, which is a word of rebuke, meaning stop doing this. He said to him, throw it away. Do you not know that we do not eat the sadaqah wealth? Banu Hashim, the tribe of the Prophet, are not entitled to the zakah payment. They are entitled to other forms of charity, but not zakah. As for the Prophet, neither is he entitled to the zakah nor normal charity. As for the tribe of Banu al-Muttalib, then they are entitled to the zakah according to the correct opinion, and they are also entitled to the fifth of the war booty. So the war booty is divided up into 5 parts, and a fifth of this goes to the near kindred of the Prophet. That would be Banu Hashim and Banu al-Muttalib. The reason is because Banu al-Muttalib defended Banu Hashim against the Quraysh. They sided with him, and as a thanks, the Prophet allowed Banu al-Muttalib to take from the war booty when it is divided, a fifth of a fifth. So we have 2 tribes then, Banu Hashim and Banu al-Muttalib. Both of them can take from the fifth of the war booty, and as for Banu Hashim, they are not allowed to take from the zakah. Banu al-Muttalib are. Then we have the 2 other brother tribes, Abd al-Shams and Nawfal, and they are just treated as any other tribe, because Abdu Manaf had 4 sons. Abd al-Shams, and he had his tribe, Nawfal, he had his tribe, Hashim, he had his tribe from which the Prophet is, and Al-Muttalib, he had his tribe. So what can the Prophet receive? He can receive a gift, and in fact everyone is allowed to receive a gift. Also from Anas ibn Malik, the Prophet found a date and he said, لَوْلَا أَن تَكُونَ مِنَ الصَّدَقَةِ لَأَكَلْتُهَا. If this date was not from the sadaqah, I would have eaten it. So the Prophet does not eat from the wealth of the zakah. Otherwise, normally when you find a date, this is one of the cheap wealth which nobody is going to come back looking for it. You're allowed to pick it up and consume it. But the Prophet ﷺ had fear. He feared that this would be from the sadaqah because he had some indications telling him that this is the case, and so he left it alone. This is the wara, when you fear doing something which will harm you in the hereafter. Otherwise, normally when you find a date as a lost item, you're allowed to take it. And we have other examples as well about the Prophet being on the safe side. For example, he says, بالغ في الاستنشاق إلا أن تكون صائما. Be excessive in the sniffing up the water in your nose when you're making wudu, except when you are fasting. Because here, even if you are fasting and you sniffed up water and it went down your throat, your fasting would not be broken. But here we are just being on the safe side to prevent water from going down your throat. Otherwise your fasting will not be broken in any case. Likewise, he said to a woman called Sauda, احتجبي عنه يا سودة. Wear the hijab from him, O Sauda. And this is speaking about a male child whom the Prophet had judged was not the brother of Sauda, but he did have a resemblance. And so to be on the safe side, he ordered Sauda to wear the hijab in front of him. So the point here is that officially, this male was not the brother of Sauda as the Prophet judged, but he did have a resemblance to being Sauda's brother. That's why, to be on the safe side, he ordered her. Hadith number 52. Not employing the family of the Prophet to collect the sadaqah. It's a longer narration, but the summary is that Ali ibn Abi Talib prevented the people from sending out Fadl ibn Abbas and Abdul Muttalib ibn Rabi'ah to collect the sadaqah. And so these two young men went to ask the Prophet about this, that can we go and collect the zakah? And we know that the collector of the zakah can have a share in the zakah as well. And to this the Prophet ﷺ told them, إِنَّ الصَّدَقَةَ لَا تَنْبَغِي لِآلِ مُحَمَّدٍ إِنَّمَا هِيَ أَوْسَاخُ النَّاسِ. That the zakah, the sadaqah, is not fitting for the family of Muhammad, it is only the dirt of the people. So we take from this that the zakah is not permissible for the family of the Prophet, whether it is given to the family of the Prophet because they're poor, or whether it is given to them because they have collected the zakah, because they are the amilina alayha. The wealth of the zakah is not permissible for the family of the Prophet, because it is the dirt of the people. People use this zakah wealth to purify their own wealth. Not even the freed servant of the family of the Prophet is allowed to receive the zakah payment. As the Prophet said to Rafi' bin Khadij, who was the Prophet's freed servant, إِنَّ الصَّدَقَةَ لَا تَحِلُّ لَنَا وَإِنَّ مَوْلَى الْقَوْمِ مِنْهُمْ. The sadaqah is not halal for us, and the freed servant of a people is from them. And Rafi' ibn Khadij came to ask the Prophet that somebody has invited him to come and collect the zakah and to take a share from the zakah as the amil alayha. And to this then the Prophet replied to him that the zakah is not permissible for us, and the freed servant of a people is from them. So they're not allowed to take from the zakah money, even if they go to collect the zakah, which would put them in one of the categories of the amilina alayha. But even then they are not allowed to take from the zakah. Ibn Taymiyyah says that if the family of the Prophet are not given from the fifth of the fifth, because maybe the war booty has not come in, then they are allowed to take from the zakah if they are poor. Because otherwise the family of the Prophet do not take from the zakah, but they do take from the spoils of the war, which is the fifth of the fifth. Hadith 53, about the Prophet accepting a gift. From Aisha, the Prophet came into the house and some meat was being cooked in a pot. And he asked for the food. He was given some bread and some ordinary type of food. He asked, did I not see some meat being cooked? And he was told, but this is sadaqah which was given to Barira, the freed female servant. So they knew the Prophet does not eat from the sadaqah, from charity. However, the Prophet said, هُوَ لَهَا صَدَقَةٌ وَلَنَا هَدِيَّةٌ. It is sadaqah for her, but for us though it is a gift from her. So it is given to Barira as a sadaqah, but Barira gives it to the Prophet as a gift. So the Prophet now is not consuming the sadaqah, rather he is consuming a gift, and he is allowed to do that. And so we find then that if somebody earns wealth which is haram, halal in and of itself, but the way it's earned is haram, and he gives it to you as a gift, then you can accept it as a gift, because accepting the gift is halal for you. And as for the haram earning, that's upon him. This is of course as long as the wealth in and of itself is halal, so it's not stolen wealth or usurped wealth, for example, because that is haram in and of itself, or for example it is not pork or the like. Of course you may refuse in the hope that he would stop earning the haram wealth, and this is definitely an option. But if you feel this will not work and you were to accept this wealth as a gift, then it would be permissible for you to do so. Hadith 54, making dua for the one who gives the zakah. From Abdullah ibn Abi Awfa, he says that the Prophet ﷺ, when someone would come to give him the zakah, he would say, Allahumma salli alayhim, O Allah, make salah upon him. So he says, my father came and gave him the sadaqah, and the Prophet said, Allahumma salli ala ali Abi Awfa, O Allah, give the salah on the family of Abu Awfa. We find from this the dua to give to somebody who gives the zakah. The salah of Allah Jalla wa Ala is when he makes good mention of you amongst the angels. We learn also that to make the dua of salah to other than a prophet is permissible,
as long as it is not done regularly as it is with a normal prophet. Now before we finish off, a few points. As for the Khawarij, then the most sensible thing to say about them is that according to the narrations, they point to the ruling that they are kuffar. This idea of them leaving the deen and them being the sharrul khalq, the worst of creation, and about the Prophet killing them just like Ad, and about the order to kill them because there is a reward for the one who does that. All of these types of wording point to the idea that they are kuffar. However, on a practical level, we ought to refrain from pronouncing a judgment. Because if we pronounce a judgment, then this will open up the doors to fitna and bloodshed. People will pronounce others to be Khawarij and then simply kill them, seeking a reward thereby. And we do not wish for such fitna. Yes, it would be different if there was an Imam and he branded such people who are creating fitna to be Khawarij and we are to kill them behind the Imam, then this would be different. Because we are to fight the people of evil under the orders of the Imam, because the Imam is a controlling figure. And we do not anticipate any anarchy when there is an Imam around. But for most of us, most of the time, we should just refrain from pronouncing a judgment. Okay, let's take some review questions. So question number 1. Describe how the Prophet described the miskin, and then state whether you should give him charity openly or secretly. Question number 2. From what has preceded, what type of evidence would you quote to a person who keeps talking about the wealth of this world? So things like how to make more money and all the other good stuff of this world, like holidays and so on. What type of evidence might you quote to him? Give at least a couple. Question number 3. Give the balanced opinion concerning the Khawarij as to whether they are kuffar or not.